Welcome to Chapter 10. In this section, we're going to look at the aorist and the future passive endings, the ones that we've so far not looked at. Remember, in the aorist and the future, we only showed you the middle endings. This week, we're going to bring both of those together and teach you them at one time in this lesson. And I think as we go through the slides today, you'll see why that is the case. Before we do that, let me just note that there are 6 principal parts to Greek verbs, and although I've not used that description up to this point, with the introduction of the aorist passive and the future passive I'm going to show you today, you'll have been taught these 6 principal parts. And while we won't overly emphasize this in the class, I did want you to be able to see this because you will see this from time to time in the Greek textbooks. So the first principal part that you learned, of course, is the present active, and that used the present and the imperfect verbs. So present and imperfect tenses both fit into what we refer to as the first principal part. The second principal part is the future active, all right, used by the future active and the future middle. The third principal part is the aorist active and the aorist middle. The fifth is the perfect active, used by the perfect active and something known as the pluperfect active, which we'll be covering later on. The fifth part is actually your perfect passive. And then finally today, the sixth part is the aorist passive, and used by both the aorist and the future passive. Now, again, I don't want to put much emphasis on these parts. You're learning them. We won't be addressing them in any way on a quiz or a test where I won't ask you to list out the 6 principal parts for me. You've been doing this stuff more intuitively, but I just wanted to highlight this for you. Now, the aorist passive formation, remember the passive voice is when the action is happening to the subject. The passive voice of the aorist has a formation that is somewhat different from both the middle and passive forms that you've seen up to this point. Like the active aorist, active and middle, it does have an augment, but it does not have a sigma suffix, and that's why we didn't learn it originally. Instead of a sigma suffix, it has a distinctive suffix of the combination of the letters theta and eta, followed by a set of personal endings. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how this is formed. Once again, using lu as our stem, notice that all of these words, all these verbs here have your epsilon augment that you're familiar with. There's your stem. But then I want you to notice that what we have then is a theta eta ending with a personal ending. So your theta eta suffix. So we have eleuthein, eleuthes, eleuthe in the singular. In the plural, we have eleuthemin, eleutheta, and then eleutheson. These are your aorist passive endings. The theta eta with that augment on the front of the stem is your clue that you are dealing with the aorist passive. And again, because these are passive, we don't simply say, for instance, with eleuthein, I loosed, but because the action is happening to the subject, it is I was loosed. In other words, somebody else loosed me, or you were loosed, okay, or she, he, or it was loosed, or we were loosed, you were loosed, or they were loosed. So these are your endings. You have that distinctive theta eta, and followed in some case simply just by one letter, the nun or the sigma, all right, or in the case of the third person singular, nothing, eleuthe. But that theta eta with the augment with the stem is your clue that you're dealing with the aorist passive. Now, just as you saw with the sigma suffix and the kappa suffix, when that theta eta comes in contact with certain consonants at the end of a stem, assimilation will take place. So in the case of pempo, these are the labials, your pi, your phi, and your beta, letters that you use your lips to pronounce. Pempo, when we put in the aorist tense, it becomes epemphein, I was sent. All that's happened is that the pi has now reverted to a phi because the theta, the th the aspirate sound has basically influenced the pi, and it would be a little more difficult to say epimphthane. So it's easier in Greek just to say epimphthane. Same thing with lambano. We wouldn't want to say elambathane. So the Greeks just caused it to be assimilated, and lambano in the aorist passive becomes elamphthane. With your gutturals, that is your kappa, your gamma, and your chi, the same thing happens. The hard consonant becomes influenced by the theta and becomes its aspirated partner. So didasco becomes edocthane. Dioko becomes ediochthane. Edidocthane, I was taught. Ediochthane, I was persecuted. And in this case, for parsing, it's just simply aorist passive indicative, first person singular. With the dentals, your delta, theta, zeta. Notice what happens here, for instance, with patho. Because we don't want to put two thetas together, the theta then becomes a sigma, and so it becomes epesthane. I was persuaded. Or in the case of the zeta, it becomes baptizo, becomes ebaptisthane. I was baptized. Again, easiest thing for you to remember when you are looking at all of these is simply to look for your augment and your distinctive theta, eta ending that will help you to recognize that you're dealing with the aorist passive. Now remember, we also taught you that there are second aorist words, and we taught you those second aorist middles, but I want you to also realize that there is a second aorist passive, and the sign of the second aorist passive is not theta eta, but just eta. Although the endings are similar to the first aorist passive, it's just an augment, a verb stem, the sign of the passive, which in this case is the eta, and the verb ending. And this time, instead of using ballo, I'm going to use grapho, because this is the way it shows up most often, and so it just be easier for you to become familiar with it this way. We have here egraphane, I was written, egraphes, you were written, egraphe, she, he, or it was written, egraphemen, we were written, egrapheta, you were written, and then egraphesan, they were written. Okay? So you won't see a whole lot of second aorist passives, but you do need to be at least familiar with the way they work. Notice that although all the endings are very similar, the distinctive theta is missing for your, and it's just the eta. One oddity about the aorist, middle, and passive endings that you are just learning comes up in the realm of deponent verbs. In the aorist tense, deponent verbs, as you know, already take the middle ending, okay, but they're always, of course, translated active and function. But because we have two different types of middle and passive endings for the aorist, what we discover is that in the aorist, some deponent verbs will take the passive endings, while some will other take the middle, and then some are actually going to take either one. No matter what ending it takes, middle, passive, or whether it can take both, the translation for the deponent verb is as it always has been so far this term. It is always going to be in the active voice. So, with that said, we have proseuchomai, which in the takes the middle. It becomes proseuchekmen. All right, but it's not I was praying for myself. It's again in the passive here, so it's aorist, deponent, indicative, first person plural. We prayed. Or in the case of paruomai, this time it takes a passive ending. It becomes eparuthane. But again, what we have here is we have aorist, deponent, indicative, first person singular. I went, or I go. I went was what I would say. Sorry. Or in the case of ginomai, it can take either middle or passive. Either one is possible. Rather than racking your brains trying to remember which one takes middle and which one takes passive, the best thing to do is just to memorize, as I've already told you, what verbs are deponent and recognize that they take middle passive endings but are translated actively. And so it shouldn't matter for you in the aorist tense whether it's middle or passive. What's important is that you know its deponent and that you translate it with the active voice. Now, let's move on to the future passive. As I told you, we're going to look at both aorist passive and future passive here. With the future passive, it's different also from the middle that you've looked at so far. But like the aorist passive, it also has that theta eta distinctive sign, okay? But it also has the sign of the future that you're already familiar with, that is the sigma. So what it's going to be here, your clue is going to be a combination of the theta eta with a sigma. And then it's going to take those middle passive present tense endings that you know as the o my endings, that is the o my, eatai, amatha, estha, untai. And how will you know then that it is a future rather than an aorist? What's your other clue? Well, of course, the future will have no augment. So let's take a look at those right now. On your screen, you can see both the singular and the plural. Notice that we have all our stems. There is no augment. After our stem is our theta eta with a sigma. That tells you that you are dealing with the future passive. And then you've got your o my, eatai, amatha, estha, untai endings. So again, no new endings to learn this week. All you have to learn instead for the future passive is just the theta eta sigma. So luthesomai is I shall be loosed. Luthese, you will be loosed. Luthesatai, she, he, or it will be loosed. Luthesamatha, we shall be loosed. Luthes estha, you will be loosed. And then luthesantai, they will be loosed. Just keep in mind that there's no augment. That's your clue. It's the future. And keep in mind that these are the passive voice only, not the middle. All right. With that behind us, let's do a little bit of passive verb practices from the aorist and the future. The first one we have up here is epistuthein. Comes from pistuo, meaning I believe. And here I have my augment, and I have my distinctive theta eta ending. That is my clue that I'm dealing with an aorist passive indicative first person singular. I was believed is how I would translate that. Next, etherapeuthemin. I know it comes from therapeuo. So my augment again tells me that it's aorist. My theta eta ending tells me that it's a passive voice. So it's aorist passive indicative first person plural. We were healed. The third one, eperutheson. Sorry, let me say that again. Eperutheson comes from the word paruamai, which I know, oh my ending, is a deponent verb. So even though it takes that theta eta ending there, and it has the augment, I know that it's aorist, but it's not passive, it's deponent. So it's an aorist deponent indicative, third person plural. They went. My fourth one for today, luthesantai, comes from the word luo is my stem. There is no augment on the front, so that's my first clue that we're not dealing with an aorist here. I have my theta eta suffix, but I also have a sigma, which tells me that I'm dealing with future passive, as well as the antai endings. So I know that it is a future passive indicative, third person plural. They will be loosed. Finally, for today, akusthesatai. Akusthesatai comes from akuo. I want you to notice that there's no augment here. So again, I know it's my future passive. There is a theta eta sigma, which tells me it's future passive. There is a little bit of an anomaly here. Between akuo, the stem, and the theta eta, there is an additional sigma. This is just something that happens in Greek with this word. It's easier to pronounce it akouthesatai rather than akouthesatai. The sigma between that helps with the pronunciation, so that's the way the Greeks did it. Nonetheless, you just need to realize that even with that anomaly of the additional sigma, that theta, eta, sigma is your clue. You're dealing with the future passive. And so you know that this is a future passive indicative, third person singular. He, she, or it will be heard. All right, the last thing that I want to mention today before I give you your marching orders for Wednesday's class prep is that there are some irregular verbs in the book. All right, there are 9 of them. Unlike in the past weeks, I'm not going to go over them. There's many of them there. Nine, excuse me, not many. There's 9 of them there. I want you to be familiar with them. You may want to make more flashcards. Note that while they all have theta, eta, some of them are spelled very differently from the vocabulary form that you have learned. Okay? They're irregular, which means that while they may not show up all that frequently, they do. They don't show up as frequently as some of the other irregular verbs that we've learned. That's why I've not spent the time to create slides for them. But you can see them there in your book, and so it would, of course, be a good idea for you to become very familiar with them. All right. With that in mind, as always, in preparation for class on Wednesday, be sure to learn the vocabulary for Chapter 10. Memorize the passive endings for the aorist and the future passive tense. Learn the 9 irregular verbs and complete at least 10 of the Chapter 10 practice sentences in the workbook. And we will see you in class.